Okay, we are recording. I am Brandon Polite, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and I'm joined by Jonathan Weinberg, who is Professor of Philosophy at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning, Brandon Polite. I greet you this morning.
Is it a fine day there in Tucson?
It is a fine day, and I was going to see how long I could sustain that, and the answer is not long. Hey, Brandon, how you doing?
I am doing okay. I'm doing great now that I'm talking to you. So we're talking about this thing you've been working on, this project that you've been working on with our friend and former guest on this series, Aaron Meskin, on the concept of middle brow art. And so, we're gonna get into the weeds here soon enough, but I just want to start off by inviting you to just like introduce us to this notion of middle brow, which everyone should be familiar with, but just get us into it and then we'll dig deeply.
Sure. So I guess I'll do a little bit of my origin story in this topic. So as an esthetician, I noticed that of course, you can write on any sort of the fine art and the high art stuff you want. You can write on opera. You can write on impressionist painting. Um, you can write on great pieces of world literature. And then one of the great things that started kind of right about when I was starting in the profession was you could also work on sort of mass and pop art. I mean, real formative text for me was Noel Carroll's book on the philosophy of horror, and it wasn't like trying to just pick out like the fine literature versions of horror. Like there was some really wonderfully schlocky stuff that he was engaging with, but there was this kind of hole in the middle. Not to make a pun off that, which is also where like a lot of my own personal tastes are. And it seems like there are lots of stuff that was just not on the radar. So particularly for me, one of my absolute loves going back since I was a kid is the American musical theater, Broadway shows. And no one was writing on that. And I think there's a general sense of like, it was beneath philosophical attention in some way. And it's easy to sort of list other kinds of things that are in that general realm. So if you think of yeah, again, like Broadway shows, think of like certain kind of uh, attempts at the great American novel. Like people talk about Jonathan Franzen always comes up in discussions of the middle brow. Or if you think about when there's sort of pop music that people think is maybe getting a little above its station, you find people wanting to call that middle brow, and it just hadn't been much attended to. And it's in this interesting zone where, on the one hand, it's not trying to be like the greatest of the great arts. It's not going to have the achievements of, I don't know, a King Lear. Like even at its best, it's certainly not that. And the worry is that it doesn't, at the same time, have the kind of, I don't know, uncontaminated energy and authenticity of mass art when it really works great. Um, and in some sense, you can't fault a great pop song for not having any sort of depth because it wasn't trying to do that. So it's fine. You just get to enjoy it, and that's great. Whereas these other works that are you're trying to do more, you can fault them for not trying to do a whole lot more, and you can also fault them maybe for like selling out in some way, like in trying to achieve whatever artistic they're trying to achieve, they end up also not even getting that because they're trying too hard to sell millions of copies. So the middle brow ends up in this sort of awkward position where it looks like it maybe has trouble achieving what could be really great about high art and what can be really great about low art. It looks like maybe it can't do either of those things. How's that as a just to locate the problem?
Yeah, right. And so low art is art made for the masses that doesn't have significant artistic ambition, whereas high art seems to be art that's not made for a mass audience. It's made for, a smaller audience of perhaps, the elite or something of that sort, the intelligentsia, the aesthetes. Um, but it has significant, right, like super high level of artistic ambition. And so that leaves this space for the middle, right, which is art that has a bit of both, right? It's aiming at mass appeal while at the same time is trying to do something artistically interesting or have, significant artistic merit or something of that sort.
Yeah, yeah, and you can find also. I think it's important as part of the conversation. There are these authors, I think, really starting in kind of like the golden age of literary modernism in the first half of the 20th century, who are really unhappy about what they identify as middlebrow work. There's a very famous essay by Virginia Woolf that's just absolutely scathing on this, and it's clear they're offering this theory of these works that are like, yeah, stuck in the middle and just being bad in the ways that the worst kind of pop art can be, and at the same time bad in the ways that the worst kind of high art can be.
Right. So it's just crap in the middle, right? Like, so if you're
Exactly.
thinking about fiction, right, you've got, your Shakespeare's on the one hand, right? And then on the other hand, you have like pulp rather novels, right? Where it's just trash, right?
Right.
And so you've got the highbrow and the
Yeah.
low brow, and then like the middle brow is just like bad, the low stuff, the lowbrow stuff, the pulp fiction is like trashy and is
Yeah.
enjoyable as
But it can be,
trash.
rollickingly fun, right?
Yeah, exactly. Whereas the middle brow stuff, at least on Wolf's account, right, seems to be like, this isn't fun. This isn't enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's not trashy enough, but it's also not good enough to be good. And so it's the worst of both worlds, as you say.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's what we're trying to argue against in our paper. Uh, and part of it, as I said, is like part of my ulterior motive is to make room for estheticians to appreciate things like Hamilton. Say, I won't start singing it, I promise.
Okay, thank you. Because I don't want to listen to it. Yeah, and so the history of the term middle brow and its, friends or enemies, right? Lowbrow and highbrow. That's it has a problematic history, right? It starts out in phrenology, right, which is going to be deeply racist and ethnocentric, with respect to certain forms of European identity, and it's going to be sort of eugenicist in a way, right? And why keep using a term with such a problematic history? I mean, we still use it in popular discourse, but why do you think we should hang on to it?
I think, well, one reason you just gave, we still use it. So we might as well try to get a better account of it, and maybe try to clean up that usage. Um, but also, I mean, Aaron and I make the claim in the paper, but it's contestable. But I'll go ahead and make it, which is that basically the phrenological history of that is just that's just the history. It's not in anyone's mind when they use it. I doubt your typical person who might look to evaluate a work as middle brow. That typical person is not thinking about that at all. Probably doesn't even know that history at all. So we're inclined to think that it's just not part of current or even terribly recent usage. So that's really the main thing. It seems like it's out there, it's being used, and I guess another reason that I think it's useful is the middleness of it does capture what we do think is really important about the category, and so it is very the brow thing is a little odd, I suppose, but the middle thing is so crucial to understanding it that it seems a shame to throw it away. I don't think philosophers have a terrific history of trying to like bring in totally new concepts that they want to the general, even the general like scholarly public to take up. So yeah, I think we're just going to stick with it and try to make the best of it.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, is there a class dimension to it, right? When you think of like highbrow, you think of, to use a middlebrow example, you think of like Fraser Crane, right? Like Frasier, not from Cheers, but Frasier from Frasier, right? Where it's sort of like uptight, you like the opera, you like your symphonies, etc. Whereas, the lowbrow seems to be associated with low class taste. And so, trashy pulp fiction, trashy action films, superficial pop music, etc. Whereas middlebrow seems to be more like middle class, right? It's people
Yeah.
who have, some college education, maybe. I mean, I feel like in the popular discourse, it seems to track class distinctions, and I'm sure that's something you want to move away from. But what are your thoughts on like the class dimension of
Yeah.
the brow talk?
So one thing that is worth getting clear on is like we don't think there's going to be any one account of the category of the middle brow. Like the term gets used in different places in different ways, and so one of the things that we encountered in trying to just see what other people are saying about the middle brow is that if you look over in outside of philosophy and over in like English literature departments and things like that, and what gets written about the middle brow there, it's often defined in terms of like works aimed at a particular class, or often a lot of gender stuff too. Like there's a ton of stuff on like the middle brow novel for women, um, and we're not looking to argue with that. Like we don't have any problem with that. It seems like completely legit use of the term, and it's not. If you define class partly in terms of things like educational status, um, then it kind of makes sense that at least some of these middlebrow works, given that they're trying to partake of elements of high art, might like you might generally be better at figuring out what's going on in them if you got at least a little bit of an education. If the work is going to be making certain sorts of allusions, say, then you need to know the relevant history literature that's making allusions to. So there's probably no way to keep it totally unentangled from uh, from class. Nonetheless, it doesn't play any role in our analysis, and we think there's kind of an aesthetic notion that can be extracted and made good use of that at most only incidentally picks up these class things in the way that I just suggested, where maybe for certain works, it's useful to at least have had a couple decent English classes so you know how to read it or something like that. Or if it's like musically ambitious, if you haven't had any kind of musical training at all, maybe you'll miss some what's in it. Having said all that, though, at least a lot of what we think of as middlebrow works, precisely because they're meant to be really accessible, are not generally going to propose a whole lot. So right before sort of recording, we were talking about how Billy Joel is probably the paradigmatic middlebrow pop star, and like I don't think you need much of anything to get into what's going on in his music, and that's one of the great things about his music, for example. So maybe that's another way of coming at it. Like certain sorts of middlebrow works might require some middle class cultural equipage, but lots of it doesn't. Lots of it just really doesn't.
Yeah, okay, cool. So let's think about more examples just to like get clearer on how you're thinking of the concept here. And so we mentioned Billy Joel just
Yeah.
now, who I think, yeah, absolutely is the platonic form of the middle brow, at least with respect to popular music. You mentioned Hamilton and Broadway musicals. What other sort of artworks are you thinking of, right? Maybe some sitcoms fit there.
You know what? A really paradigm case is Prestige TV is going to
Okay.
count as really solidly middle brow. Pretty much like all the great HBO. Can we still say HBO even though they've taken it
Yeah,
out? I
we'll keep it.
First they took Pluto from me, and now they took HBO. And where will they stop, Brandon Polite? Where will they
I
stop?
know they took
Um,
Twitter too. So,
yeah, well, we know they there. We can put. Let's not get in trouble. This is going to be a
okay.
public broadcast. Um,
Yeah, he's awesome.
but
Let's just throw that out there.
yeah, but I think of I mean, The Wire. I want to say is a spectacular piece of middlebrow, I guess filmmaking is not the right word, TV making. So those are some real go-to examples for me. But I mean, recently a very popular show amongst our ilk was The Good Place, and The Good Place is another thing I think was really successful at being middlebrow TV. I don't think it counts as prestige TV, but it's just
Yeah.
obviously it's got a lot. It's got a lot going on philosophically. Um, maybe I should. I talked about the view we're looking to contrast with. Maybe I should put like the nut of our, the nutshell version of our view on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Please do.
Just so you can see why we're talking about these works in these ways. So the view that Aaron Meskin and I look to defend basically takes these two elements: the mass accessibility on the one hand that characterizes much of what one might call lowbrow art, and the kind of artistic ambitions that are at least to be celebrated in highbrow art. And it says middlebrow art is things that is trying to do both of those things at the same time. So it's trying to be accessible to a large audience. Maybe it will fail in that, but it's trying to do that. It's also trying to not just be enjoyable, but to actually have some sort of larger artistic ambitions, which again, it might not succeed at those either. So middlebrow for us, it's not an automatically pejorative term. It's also not automatically a complimentary term. It just says, here's the kind of thing this work is trying to do, to say something more than, I don't know, Call Me Maybe was trying to say, but also to be available to something like a large scale audience, the way that Joyce's Ulysses was clearly not trying to do. And so, given that, I hope you can see why things like, again, like The Good Place or The Wire, like I think that describes them quite well. There's a lot going on, a lot of philosophical themes going on. It doesn't have to be philosophical necessarily. I mean, also there's just a lot of you can think of works that are just visually ambitious. Even so, an example I like was a show. I guess it's not that recent anymore. The Hannibal. Did you ever watch that show?
Yeah.
About the serial killer that was made most famous in The Silence of the Lambs. It's just, if you out there in YouTube land, if you've never seen it, it's such a sumptuously beautiful show that even if it wasn't getting into sort of interesting sort of ethical issues, I think that would be enough to make it count as middlebrow. But it's also just a great story. Like the storytelling is gripping and it's enjoyable. So that's the view we're looking to defend in our account.
Yeah, awesome. And as you were talking, I mean, there's several questions that popped in my head. I'll focus on one, and I'll get to it by thinking that, with basically any film that's been nominated for an Academy Award is probably middlebrow, right?
For sure.
It's like has mass enough appeal that it like gets into like the Academy's like radar, right? But it has enough artistic merit that like they feel it's meritorious given their standards, right? And a medium like film, right? There's clear instances of lowbrow, highbrow, and middlebrow, right? We are talking about TV, and you mentioned prestige TV, right? Prestige would seemingly indicate high, right? And I'm wondering with television, since it seems to be such a democratic medium compared to film, where there's like avant-garde and et cetera, right? Which is like seemingly highbrow. Is there a highbrow in television, right? Or like, is the best TV can get middlebrow?
I'm inclined to think that mostly it's going to be middlebrow, and of course a lot of it is lowbrow. Or let's not even use that term. Let's just say a lot of it is unambitious mass appeal.
Yeah, soap operas.
Yeah. Although even some of those can be a little. I've been watching the show Yellowstone,
Yeah.
lately,
I was
which
thinking
is,
Dallas too, right? Back in the
oh
day.
gosh, yes.
Yeah.
But there's still lots and lots of examples of that. I think the only reason I'm hesitating, actually agree, is that there's such a huge number of television outlets now.
Yeah.
I can imagine some of them occasionally having at least some works that are like, we have a niche audience and we're just trying to appeal to that niche audience, and we're going to do something maybe a little wild, that most folks won't get, and that'll be okay.
Mhm.
So where you can find that, maybe that could sometimes count as, you know, so not caring about its mass appeal that it would not be middlebrow. One thing I should also say here is we don't think that like lowbrow, middlebrow, highbrow presents any sort of partition of artwork space. So lots of works for which the brow categories maybe are a poor
Yeah.
fit. Um, so, for example, certain kinds of really hard to listen to, um, very aggressive heavy metal, where it's like it's really not looking for a mass audience, you know. So it can't count as middlebrow on our count because it's not looking for a mass audience. But it would be, it would not generally be the sort of thing one would call, you know, high art. It's not like, it doesn't fit into that either, and so it's just because it has its own niche that it's looking to do stuff in, and that's just browless probably on our account.
Yeah, and you wouldn't want to say that it's trash either because
Not to their
of
face.
yeah, exactly. Um
No, I wouldn't. You're right. No,
yeah,
I
right.
mean it's actually
Because
it
of like
often,
how technically complicated it may be. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I mean, and I think a lot of it has, it's clear what its artistic ambitions are, and often they're quite successful at that, and the people in its audience clearly get a lot out of that, you know. So yeah, it's definitely not, it's not bubblegum metal. Now that I've said that, I can't imagine what could fit in that category. But, so it's, yeah, it's not that, it's not at all a bad making feature, not at all a bad making feature that it is outside the brow, um, categories. It's just, don't try to evaluate it in those terms, or you'll be messing it up.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that some works of art just don't fit in this space, right? So you're carving up a large swath of artworks that exist, right? And yet some of them just don't get captured within this
Yeah.
conceptual framework.
There's also this funny thing, um, that we just say a little bit about in the paper, where over time it seems like some works change their browse status, which then makes you wonder, can you in any can you, without indexing it to time, say, for example, whether Dickens works are
Yeah.
lowbrow or middlebrow? Because it looks like that's something that has changed over time. And
Shakespeare.
yeah, absolutely. So, and you know, I think a lot of what light opera, from, you know, far enough in the past, it's no longer accessible to a mass audience today, but it was certainly not seen. I mean, in some sense, opera is so marked, like culturally, as high art now, that like, it can't possibly just be mass art. Whereas probably a lot of it was written to be mass art in its time. So there are lots of interesting cases of things that just challenge the brows, and we're totally good with that. Like that's like, we think that's an important thing to note, really,
Yeah.
about these categories.
Yeah, that the concept can still do a lot of, you know, helpful philosophical work, even though it doesn't capture everything.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
That's our view.
Yeah. Awesome. And so maybe let's focus a bit on your interest in this, right? Right. How you
Uh-huh.
came to it philosophically, which is your love of Broadway musicals, right? And a year or two ago, Aesthetics for Birds had a roundtable on Stephen Sondheim, right? After he passed away. And you were one of the contributors to that. And so Sondheim, middlebrow.
Yeah, Sondheim is like, again, I keep wanting to use the phrase spectacularly
Yeah.
middlebrow, because his work is always always ambitious. I mean, it's musically ambitious, and the shows themselves are almost always thematically ambitious. There's some shows, like Cole Porter's Anything Goes, which I love, I was actually in a production of it in high school. And but it's like it's just mass art. Like I mean, it's great music. I mean, it's really great music, and it's a fun show, but it's not trying to say much beyond itself. So like some Broadway shows, and maybe even the majority of them historically, I don't know, might not even be middlebrow. Like they're just trying to be a lot of fun, a good evening out especially before the existence of television. But Sondheim's always trying to do more, So like his show Sunday in the Park with George is about the artist George Seurat, and like Sondheim tries to make his music both patently pointillist, right? Because he's trying to play with who Seurat was as an artist, but still be accessible to a Broadway going ticket buy-in audience. And I think he's very successful. Like that's actually like maybe if you held me down and tortured me and pick one favorite Broadway show, that would be it. It would be Sunday in the Park with George. Both the themes, I just repeat myself, I'll say both the themes that he engages with and the way he wants to do what he does with his music, I think are both ambitious in the kind of way that makes it middlebrow. I mean, there's lots of reasons why it's a shame that he's dead, but I kind of would love to know if how he'd feel about that label. Because I mean, it was important to him that his work be accessible. I mean, he wanted people to see it and enjoy it, but also like clearly he wanted it to do more. Oh, I mean, one thing that's sort of famous about him is he was often critiqued for not making his music quite hummable enough, and he clearly rankled at that. And partly he rankled at it because like he wasn't just trying to make something humble. He also rankled because he thought, no, lots of my tunes are really good, like they are hummable. Stop giving me grief for that.
Yeah, just because your humming sucks doesn't mean I can't hum along with it or other people
That's
can't hum
right.
along with it.
Yeah. It's not like trying to hum Schoenberg,
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
I try that regularly. But yeah, next time I see you, I think I'll need to bring like some clamps and a car battery so that we can hold you down and torture you so that.
Well, I just told you what the answer would be.
All right, fine. I won't do it,
Yeah.
Jonathan.
Now you have to do it for like, what's my fifth favorite musical,
Okay,
or something like that.
What is your fifth favorite?
I'll never tell.
All right, the car battery's coming out next time I see you.
Don't threaten me with a good time, Polite.
Just need to find an AutoZone. They're a sponsor of this video, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Okay, for
That's where I get my wiper blades.
Exactly, same.
AutoZone.
Exactly.
Actually, they have a strong connection to my beloved hometown of Memphis. So like, go AutoZone.
There we go. They are
and
not
send
a sponsor.
Things Federal Express.
Awesome. Yeah. So you've got Broadway shows, musicals that are just meant to be fun. And I think, when you think of lowbrow, typically you're thinking of trash, right? That this thing's trashy, like romance novels, like, works of pulp fiction, like cheesy action films, right? They're trashy, maybe they're lurid, right? But I like how you're describing it as no, lowbrow. It can be that, but it can also be just like stuff that's made for pure enjoyment, right? Cole Porter, right? Would probably not dig being referred to as lowbrow, and yet, his stuff is just like clever for the sake of being clever, right? It's super hummable. It's huge mass appeal, but not significantly, as you say, ambitious.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's funny you keep using trash. I have to confess, like my immediate association with thinking about trash is John Waters, and like, he's like he is either avant-garde or middlebrow, depending on the work you pick. But like, he's never I mean, if he's lowbrow, he's doing it in such an in-your-face aggressive way that it skips up to avant-garde. Like I don't have a good theory of how that works exactly. But like, actually, we have a discussion in the Aaron. You know, one fun thing about co-authoring papers with other estheticians is like everyone brings their own taste and background to it. So like, there's some significant discussion of both Texas barbecue and hip hop in there, and that's entirely Aaron. I don't know much about those categories. I mean, I enjoy them, but I don't really know them. Whereas there's an extended discussion of different productions of Hairspray in it, and that's me. That's something I brought to it. And so we contrast the original John Waters movie, the first one, with Divine, and then the stage musical that was made a number of years later, and then the movie of the stage musical that was made a few years after that. And I critically evaluate particularly the different casting choices of the Edna Turnblack character, and in terms of
So you're talking about Hairspray, just
yeah. Oh, did I not say Hairspray?
no, you just said John Waters. Yeah, you're talking about Hairspray.
I'm sorry
for anyone who's unfamiliar. Yeah,
yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So and so in the original movie, it's played by Divine, who's just really interesting but really challenging. Like there's nothing mass accessible about Divine, which is why those of us who love her. And then in the movie, it's Harvey Fierstein, which I think is really interesting because he's clearly a much more accessible figure than Divine, although his singing is aesthetically challenging in its own right. But like, there's still something I think really artistically interesting about that. I mean, partly because he's this like icon of gay theater, and something very interesting about having him play a domestic housewife. I think is very interesting. But then when they did the movie of it, they did it with John Travolta in drag in a fat suit.
Yep.
And boy, did I not like that. And I think it's a case of like straight up populist pandering without any ambition to it. It's just like, wouldn't it be funny to put John Travolta in a fat suit? Woo! Sign me my check, and like that's clearly what was going. To me, at least, that's clear what was going on. It's like this will just bring people in to see it without having the ambition. So I want to say the original. So Divine is not middlebrow. Harvey Fierstein, in this context, at least, is middlebrow. And the John Travolta thing is like maybe the whole work on the whole is middlebrow, but he is not a piece of the ambition thing. It's just an attempt to be popular and have appeal. And I think in a way where it's an an aesthetic demerit of the film, that particular casting choice.
Maybe an epistemic.
Mr. Travolta and your lawyers, your performance was great. Don't get me wrong. I have nothing against you personally, sir. I just don't think it was a great casting decision. Okay.
Yeah. Do you know whether Waters had any control over the casting, or is it just like the executive producers of the
I don't know.
company?
I don't know the answer to that.
Interesting if he cast it, right? Because I mean, each of the castings is alienating to a certain extent in a different way, right? Harvey Fierstein's singing versus Divine's abrasiveness versus just the weird miscasting. It would be interesting if it were intentionally miscast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know the answer. I should look into that. I mean, it certainly wouldn't surprise me if he was involved in. No, I mean, I know he was involved in the production of the stage musical, and I just don't know to what extent he was in the movie version of the same.
Yeah. So the thought might be, if I'm going to sell out, let me really sell out, right?
But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to your question.
Okay, that's okay. We can Wikipedia it later. Okay,
it's so hard to research things like that, though. You like look online,
yeah.
And of course, there's so much. It's just the PR people where everyone quotes like, it was wonderful working with so and so. They're the most brilliant, whatever. And like, you can't. No one's going to give the real dish.
Yeah, that's true. Um, Here's a good segue, I think. So learning about stuff, huh? Um, TED Talk, TED Talks, right, seem to be another sort of paradigmatic instance of the middle brow where they have, not artistic ambitions so much as intellectual
Yeah.
ambition, right? But they're also made for mass appeal. So it's not like, um, a paywalled philosophy journal article, right? Which is, just deliberately eschewing mass appeal, even though it has high intellectual aims. Um, uh, so what are your thoughts on how TED Talks fit into like middle brown? In this case, again, it's not an aesthetic thing so much as an intellectual thing.
Yeah, I think TED Talks are a great example of the the middle brow category as we are sort of unpacking it. So, for exactly the reasons you said, right? It's got it means to be entertaining. Like they have that super strict time limit, so no one's going to feel overwhelmed by it, and they clearly um, try to bring people in and cultivate in them who are going to give a good show. But then it's meant to have real, people are supposed to be bringing in some bit of science, some bit of technology, whatever it is they've got to offer to it, or writers talking about their writing, for example, is another thing that are great. So it's mass appeal plus ambition, like that. That's exactly the formula. And one thing we haven't talked about here yet, I've said how, on our view, middlebrow, the term middlebrow is not automatically pejorative, but there are clearly distinctive ways of failing as a middlebrow work, because part of what makes it interesting as a category, part of why we think it's worth preserving the category, you were asking about that earlier, is that there's clearly a tension between trying to appeal to a very broad audience and trying to achieve something substantially, either artistically or in TED Talks intellectually. And sometimes the works fail because they just don't handle that tension well. And so essentially the worst of the TED Talks are not the ones that fail to be entertaining, but at least they got the science right, because those are not going to go viral. And like no one's going to see those. It's the ones that are like really flashy and exciting, but then it turns out like they're just telling you falsehoods, or like they're not telling you anything at the end. Like they only manage to be entertaining. Like they try so hard to be entertaining, they forget or throw away actually being intellectually satisfying. There's going to be other concerns with TED Talks. I mean, actually, I had a slip of the tongue earlier, and I said epistemically instead of aesthetically. With TED Talks, it is epistemically. It is about you're supposed to be learning stuff. And one thing about it is there have been a lot of TED Talks where the science at the end later has not worked out well. So a really famous one is Amy Cuddy's TED Talk about oh gosh, what's the term for it? The big, doing the big strong poses. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
power posing.
Yeah.
And that's like that science has not worked out very well, although there's been, I guess, some more recent results showing at least maybe there's a little something to it. But like you watch that TED Talk, and the story is that there's a little something to it. It's like, this will change your life. So one of the things you get when you watch a TED Talk is you're not getting any of the like refereeing, you're not getting any of the appropriate hedging. Obviously, there's almost never any presentation of the methodology, and so those are risks. But having said that, if you've read Cuddy's papers from that period and watched the TED Talk, she's actually conveying the science quite effectively. It turns out later the science was going down a wrong path, but like at the time, she didn't know that yet. We didn't know that yet. And so if you think, has this talk successfully conveyed the substance of what at least they thought was the science? I think the answer is yes. It does a great job of it. And the TED Talks, when they work well, that's what they do. They take some really interesting ideas, some novel and maybe unintuitive results, and they put together in in a clear and catchy way in less than half an hour. Like that's, I think, that's to be celebrated. Like the ones that are successful, we should appreciate. Like it's extra hard to do this thing that's intellectually substantive and to do it in a way that's catchy and interesting and doesn't make you want to change the channel. Just like when you have a really successful piece of middlebrow art, that it can, like a good place. The Good Place is a really good example of that. Like it engages with so much rich philosophy actually, and it's just hilariously fun the whole time, and it doesn't feel like, it's not like we're going to tell some jokes and then now we're going to give you the philosophy lecture, right? It's all so seamlessly integrated, that like that's an extra mark of its achievement, that was able to do all that and be popular. And I want to say the same thing about the successful TED Talks.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just out myself as someone who doesn't like TED Talks. And I think it's precisely, they're so formulaic. Like once you've seen one, you sort of have the
Oh, okay.
format for how they're all gonna go. And, it's just like, how like poets have the poet voice where they all sort of softly and
Uh,
seriously read. Like TED Talks have like the TED Talk voice, which is like this very specific way of talking, and it just really grates me. It rubs
I
me the wrong way.
yeah, I can see, and it's interesting. The couple, I've seen a couple that were done by philosophers who I know personally, and is exactly, you're like, that doesn't sound like so and so. There, it sounds like
Uh-huh.
them trying to channel the TED thing.
Yeah.
Um, I can see that. I mean, that's I understand where you're coming from on that, and I'm not unsympathetic to it, but I don't think that's the middle brownness of it. I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
the cliche thing is just like, maybe it's a genre that's played out. You
Yeah.
know, it's like I love superhero movies, I love them, but you know they're
I'm
kind of
done.
they've drilled that much. Though everyone go out and see the Marvels. It's a really fun movie, and like
Yeah.
its numbers are so bad that it's going to be like I want all these characters to get more movies. So please, people in Brandon Polite's universe, go watch the Marvels.
I mean, I wonder, if it's the sort of canary in the coal mine example where it's, like it's done so abysmally bad at the box office that like, obviously the stories are coming out in various news outlets that, is this the death of
Yeah,
the superhero movie, which I think you're absolutely right that as a genre, it really has played out. And I think it's just because so many of the Marvel movies were just like low quality in various ways and just sort of the same thing again and again and
yeah.
again. Like, oh,
But this is
rich arrogant guy with beard gets superpowers somehow, right? Like, oh, awesome.
yeah. But this is one thing that's great about the Marvels is it's light
Yeah.
and whimsical, and I mean, it's one bearded guy to another. I don't know what you're talking about, but the girl power element I thought was really great, um, and novel, and not something that has been explored thoroughly yet. So that's kind of why it seems to me a shame. I don't want the Marvels to be the indicator that the genre has played out, because it is not actually an example of the played outedness. Sorry, I feel we are straying from
No,
the core topic.
no, totally fine. And I haven't seen it, so now maybe I should go see it.
Yes,
I think I will. So thank you.
there's
Um,
one mid-credit scene that you need to watch, but there's not another one. So after the mid-credit scene, you can go,
okay. So you stayed for the whole credits and we're
just in
like,
case.
oh, there's nothing here. Oh, Dolby Digital had a role. Interesting. Okay.
Oh, look, no animals were harmed in the making of this film. That's good to know.
That is, I mean, it makes me feel better. Um, and so one thing you mentioned that we haven't talked much about is you talked about like the failed TED Talk, right? But
Yeah,
what would be some examples of failed middlebrow works of art that either fail on like not ambitious enough or overly ambitious to the point where like it's alienating to a mass audience, right? Like there are lots
yeah.
of different ways that they could fail to be successful, even if we want to properly categorize them as middlebrow.
No, that's a great question. So, in general, I'd say that the types of failures that most make people want to call a work middlebrow in a pejorative way are ones where the artists took some sort of shortcuts to make things to keep things accessible and give them the appearance of depth where it's in some sense not really there. So I think like sentimentality is one of those things that often is a failure mode in middlebrow art. And interestingly, it's not a failure mode, I think, or not typically a failure mode for mass art. Like so, He Stopped Loving Her Today by George Jones is just a spectacular piece of country music. Now it's as sentimental as it gets. First the part where he goes do 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 do, you know, the lady wreath upon his doorway. Is that but like a real formative, aesthetically formative moment for me in my life was when I was in high school and I went to see a production. I had the chance to see a production of Les Miserables in New York, and I'd never seen the show, and I knew a lot of the music, and I loved it. And there's a part. Do you know the show? Have you ever seen it?
Mm-hmm.
Les Miserables. So it's based on the Victor Hugo novel.
Yeah.
And there's a part where there's this battle at the barricades, the little student rebellion, which is doomed. And at one point, this street urchin, Gavroche, who's like, I don't know, 8 or 10, something like that. He's a kid, like a little kid. And he's going to go out and scavenge ammunition amongst the dead between the barricade and the French army. And he gets this, and he's going to get back to bring the ammo back to the students, and he gets shot. And he struggles up and keeps singing, struggles up and goes to do it again and gets shot again. And here's the thing, I really remember this vividly. I am weeping because you can't not weep. Like, it's a really great production of it. The kid is tragic, but I'm just thinking, oh, you bastard! You're just mashing that button in my affective makeup. Like it's like you're trying to make this seem, profound, and it's just sadistic.
Yeah,
is what it is. And so that's an example. You certainly can find examples of things where one in trying to pursue an artistic ambition, it just loses the mass appeal. So if I can go back to Sondheim, as I always will, there's this one show of his called Merrily We Roll Along, which is a story about these 3 friends who form their friendship when they're very young, as young aspiring artists in New York City, and then it's about the trajectory of their lives, and eventually there's an estrangement of 2 of the characters, and another one has their unrequited love with third. But it's told in reverse chronological order. It actually starts in the present, or what the present was when the show was written, and then goes back to it, which actually gives it like starting off knowing how they're all going to end, and you get to the scene where they have all this optimism, and you're like, oh, this is not going to work for them. I think it's artistically quite successful, but the show has had tremendous trouble finding a good audience because it's just really hard for most people to kind of follow that backwards trajectory.
Yeah.
So that would be a case where I think the work failed. Like, it's an artistic success, but sometimes not a middlebrow success. It was never a big hit. Indeed, the first time it closed quite early in the run.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I think it's on Broadway right now with Daniel Radcliffe, and it's gotten really good reviews.
I've heard that, and my God, I want to go out there and see it so bad. But one thing I really want to see is not just those performances, but also I want to see how because it's been revived repeatedly. Because like, it's a great show. The music it's great Sondheim music. But like, how can we adjust the formula and make it work? And I want to see if they finally hit it. But certainly, if you go, like, if I can just stick to the original New York production, which flopped almost immediately, like that clearly was not. If part of being middlebrow is being mass accessible and artistically ambitious, it's a failed work in middlebrow work in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I think. Another kind of standard failure mode is just when the stuff that's supposed to be deep just seems sort of stapled on, where it's not integrated into the work in a good way. An example of that, I'll stick with musical theater. The show Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat by Andrew Lloyd Webber, whom I despise because I'm a Sondheim person. So I have to despise Andrew Lloyd Webber. By and large, overwhelmingly, that show is just fun pop, mass art. But there's this one, the Act 1 ender, is the one. So it's the story of Joseph from the Old Testament. And by and large, there's nothing religious in the show whatsoever. But there's this one song, well, children of Israel are never alone, and the Lord is always with this thing. And it's this sort of deep, somber tune. And it's just like, what's this doing in the show? Is it sort of like, I guess we got to pretend like we're, doing something religiously deep here, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I will say, in fairness to Andrew Lloyd Webber, he can actually do the religious stuff quite well, because I think Jesus Christ Superstar is actually a really good middle brow show, actually. But just like we better have some thematic depth. So let's smash it in here at the end of Act One. That's not a good way to do it. It would have been better off just being fun and goofy all the way through.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one final question. We'll end it with this, since you brought up Andrew Lloyd Webber. How was Cats the longest running musical in Broadway history? Because extraordinary mass appeal, seemingly artistic ambition, but it's incoherent and the music's not great.
I curse you, Brandon Polite, for putting the position of having to defend Andrew
No.
Webber,
you don't have to defend. You could just go along with it.
I do though. So first of all, I will say, actually, that's another good example of exactly the thing I was complaining about with Joseph and the Amazing Colored Dreamcoat. The Memory song, which is the one song everyone knows. I mean, that's a really powerful, moving song, and it's completely unearned by the story, such as it is. And one thing, if you've only ever seen that wonderfully bizarre movie of it, it has so much more plot in it than the original stage version does. And maybe maybe in some ways it was better to just treat it as like a review musical with a bunch of songs about cats.
Yeah.
Like maybe that would be fine. It's definitely very middlebrow. So first of all, I mean, remember the source material is T.S. Eliot.
Yeah.
Not T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland, but still T.S. Eliot. But here's the thing about it, because I saw one of the traveling productions. I never saw it in New York. I grew up in Memphis. I didn't get to see that much in New York. But you have to think the sets and the costumes and the dancing were all really groundbreaking at the time. Really amazing. And one of the things they would do, actually, I think they did this in the New York parts, certainly in the touring ones, is at in the intermission, they didn't close the curtain. Rather, one of the actors playing one of the cats, I forget which one, actually stayed up in sort of in character stationary the whole time. But then you could come up and actually explore the set, this sort of junkyard set, and it was so lavish and detailed. It was a real wonder. And again, the costume and the makeup, the cat-like dancing, we did not have to worry about weird digital stuff. The costume, like that was all really successful. Really so. And also, the music is not great, and some of the songs absolutely suck, but there are a number that are just good, fun numbers. Like the Magical Mr. Mistopheles number it's a great number. I'm not going to hold that against Webber. I'm big enough to acknowledge that's a great number. Memories really is a great song. I'm not going to deny that either. So I can't understand how it was long running. And what's interesting is its artistic ambitions were utterly not dramatic ones, right? So you think with a typical play, and certainly with the Sondheim shows, a lot of the artistic ambitions are in the drama, in the story of the play, and that's completely non-existent in Cats. But it had these other sorts of ambitions with the form that I think were actually pretty successful.
Awesome. So we'll go from the magical Mr. Mistopheles to me thanking the wonderful Mr. Weinberg. Jonathan,
and we all say, no.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me. This was
thank you so much,
fun.
Brandon. I had a great time too, man.
Awesome.